Hello and welcome to The Tall Historian. My name is Nick. Thanks for checking out our channel. In this video, we are about to do a reaction to part 2 of the American Revolution. If you've not seen part 1, check out our reaction below in the description. Make sure you give us a like and a follow. Subscribe to our channel as we're building this from the ground up. It really would mean a lot and help support and make this available, show others it on their feeds as well. And also, to make sure we are watching the original content. We love what OverSimplified and others are doing, helps them support history. Make sure you're watching them if you have not already gotten to as well with this video. But without further ado, we're jumping into part 2.
Done right. Keep watching until the end of the video to learn how you can get 20% off the annual premium subscription. Washington's butt was sufficiently kicked. Winter was here. His troops' morale was low. Some just up and left. Washington needed to do something, anything to restore faith in the revolution. The British had spread throughout New Jersey and settled in for a winter of drinking cider and partying hard.
Right. So where we are picking up is that Washington and the Americans had taken back over Boston. The British had regrouped a bit, and they were traveling down to New York, where they met them there. The British kicked Washington and the Americans out of New York after surrounding them, and then the colonists were taking heavy losses on the way back as they're being kicked out into New Jersey, what is now New Jersey. And so now they're settling in for winter, and it's definitely the momentum's on the British side. So now we're seeing what reaction would you have for the Americans.
Expected an attack in the winter, so Washington started making plans for an attack in the winter. The British had hired a large force of Hessian mercenaries from the German states of Hesse-Kassel and Hesse-Hanau to fight the rebels. It was these mercenaries that were stationed across the Delaware River from Washington and his army. And there were more Hessian reinforcements incoming, but they made an unscheduled stop because their commander got thirsty. No, not that kind of thirsty. That kind of thirsty. It was Christmas Eve with a blizzard outside when Washington heard the Hessian defenses were down, and he decided.
Yeah, so when you think about this too, mercenaries, like, they're hired hands, for extra help for different things. So they might not be as bought into the cause, or as, even all the way, even you could even say maybe even up to speed with with the rest of the army. So, saying that for this, you're saying that they're hired hands, right? And so the big pull for them is the money that they're getting paid. And so, you could tell that their guard was down. That the British's guard was down, because, like, hey, the colonists are on the run. We're going to squash out this rebellion, go back home. Let's just stick it in for the winter. It's cold. They're not going to do anything. Because you think about it too, in the snow, it's hard to move a lot of people during that time. They've got equipment. It's just hard to move around, and it's getting close to Christmas, and there's not usually a lot of movement around then. And so Washington's trying to use this as a way to attack and bring back some momentum.
Decided to attack. He made a perilous crossing of the icy Delaware River with 2,400 men and marched 9 miles to Trenton, where he caught the Hessian forces completely off guard. After a short but fierce battle, the Hessians surrendered in droves. It was a much-needed victory that sent a clear message, not only to the British, but to Americans across the colonies. The war was far from lost. General Cornwallis led the British forces south to counterattack the Americans, but in a series of battles, Washington's defensive positioning and flanking maneuvers defeated the British 3 times in 10 days, and the British decided to abandon southern New Jersey for the rest of the winter. Washington finally set up a winter camp in Morristown, but for the Americans, there was much less partying than the British. Elsewhere, the British had taken Newport, Rhode Island, because it was a good naval base. In the south, they failed to take Charleston, South Carolina, which left British loyalists unsupported and vulnerable to more harassment and even mass expulsion. Congress sent Benjamin Franklin to France on a mission to convince them to join the war, and while the French generally loved any opportunity to hoodwink the Brits, they didn't want to join unless it was a sure win. So for now, Franklin spent his days chilling out and chasing tail. The British Parliament couldn't believe the war wasn't over yet, and the pressure.
So yeah, you have to think about too, is that not all the Americans, like, some of them they were called loyalists, but they were still loyal to the British Empire. And there's a lot of tension that's building, especially sometimes in the South too, that there's more of that. So that whole Charleston defeat's actually kind of a big deal, because somewhere in the South, like, they don't have an out just to kind of get that reprieve. And so there was a lot of attacks between, with tarring and feathering, and it's light of it in the video, but it was pretty intense. And so what Benjamin Franklin was doing is trying to get outside support from the French, whether it be from supplies, maybe some men, like that help really turn the tide of the war and give a lot more momentum to it. But the French want to make sure that they're obviously going to win. Like they want to be able to make sure they're on the winning side if they're going to join in. And that's where this kind of stalemate is right now.
Pressure was on to end it, so the British came up with a plan. General Burgoyne in Montreal and General William Howe in New York would advance through the Hudson Valley and meet in the middle, splitting the colonies in two, and thus screwing over the American communication lines. Burgoyne began his movement south, and after taking Fort Ticonderoga quite easily, he then came across heavy American resistance, so he sent Howe a dingle-dongle asking if he'd be showing up anytime soon. Meanwhile, Howe had completely abandoned the plan and gone for all-out personal glory by capturing the American capital, Philadelphia. He defeated Washington and his army at Brandywine Creek by using the old hit him with a decoy and flank him from behind tactic, and Philadelphia was now in British hands, forcing Congress to escape to York. But Burgoyne was left on his own to face the ever-increasing American force in Saratoga. American General Horatio Gates teamed up with our old friend Benedict Arnold to deal one final blow to Burgoyne's army. Arnold wanted to take the fight to the British, but Gates wanted to wait for the British to come to them. After a heated debate, Gates, the senior officer, told Arnold to go to his room, but Arnold defied his orders, and at the Battle of Bemis Heights, he charged at the British and obliterated them. Great job, Horatio. By the way, what happened to that other guy who was in Saratoga? Who? Benedict Arnold. Never heard of him. Ouch. Hey, George, didn't I do a great job?
Yeah, so that's, if you remember from the first video, that's the second big time where someone else, and it was probably more of a joint job and success, and that they're taking the credit. Gates took the credit, where Benedict Arnold, he went around orders, but he is the one who led the defeat of the British. And so he definitely is trying to seek out glory, seek out recognition. And when he's not getting that, you can see the continual seeds of not feeling respected, not feeling like he's being recognized for the worth that he's bringing to the Americans. And so it's definitely a watch, and that's where you can kind of see the seeds and the idea being planted of maybe I'm not being respected as much as I thought I was.
Taking Philadelphia and all? Didn't I? You're fired. Both Burgoyne and Howe returned to Great Britain, leaving British General Henry Clinton to take charge of the war. And the war was about to take a nasty turn, because with the victory at Saratoga, the French were finally ready to join the Americans. All right, Benny, we're in. Hey, isn't this kind of funny? Because you're a republic trying to overthrow an absolute monarchy, and I'm an absolute monarchy helping you? Like, could you imagine if your revolution inspired my people to revolt against me, and then they imprisoned me and all my family, and they chopped all of our heads off? Could you imagine?
Need to run Windows on your Mac? Parallels Desktop makes it simple.
That's called foreshadowing. For now in America, winter was here once again, which meant yet more disease, more starvation, and even a little mutiny.
And you can see how the seeds of what the Americans are doing helped, fulfill and see within the French population. And we're going to have a whole other story of the French Revolution that came, and that's where all that kind of joke came in. But it was big. Those wins were big in getting the French help for the Americans.
After losing Philadelphia, Washington's job was again on the line. But suddenly, a Prussian guy with a very fancy name, hired by Benjamin Franklin, showed up out of nowhere and said, "Hey, I'm here to give your men a European military training." And train them he did. They learned how to shoot accurately, how to march in formation, where to poop and where not to, and strict punishments were handed out to any who didn't comply. Washington's army came out of the winter in 1778 a new and improved force, ready to take Philadelphia back from the British. In the end,
and you have to remember too that's a big deal. Like these are not like these are all men who signed up for militia, but they had other occupations. They weren't trained, trained warriors, trained soldiers like the British are. And so to get this vital training that Washington had, but to teach it on like such a big scale and have just a new voice and a new way of explaining it and giving a just European like official training to be able to organize better, that's big. And you can see how it's really going to help turn in this second half. the war.
Though they didn't have to. With the French entry into the war, the British ordered General Clinton to evacuate Philadelphia and consolidate all of the British forces in New York. So Washington sent Benedict Arnold to reoccupy and secure the city as he pursued the British through New Jersey on land, eventually finding a good opportunity to attack at Monmouth Courthouse. The battle took place on a sweltering hot summer's day, and as many soldiers died from heat stroke as they did from battle. In the end, after some incompetence/borderline treason from Washington's second in command, it was a draw. And in this war, a draw is kind of a victory for the Americans. Next up, let's talk about this guy. This is John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones is handsome, Scottish, and absolutely insane. When the war first broke out, everyone was like, how did the colonies expect to stand up to the might of the British Navy with their meager fleet of converted merchantmen? Yep, try telling that to John Paul Jones. This guy sailed to the British Isles, somehow captured a British ship off the coast of Ireland, and brought it back to France. Then he returned, attacking more ships, raiding towns, and evading capture the entire time. These are basically pirate tactics. But hey, if it works, it works. In one incident, he captured a British ship and returned to a Dutch port without an official ensign because his was lost during the battle. That's a big no-no and can have you arrested as a pirate. The Dutch helped him out by quickly creating a design based on Benjamin Franklin's description of what the American flag should look like, and they entered it into their records as an official US flag. What they came up with looks pretty cool. The whole campaign probably played heavily on British morale and brought into question their ability to win the war. And fun fact, he was so cool that one of the towns he raided in 1778 gave him an official honorary pardon in 1999. Keep ripping in heaven, John Paul Jones. You're an angel now. What the Continental Navy was lacking in resources, though, the French entry into the war made up for. The French began with naval skirmishes in the English Channel, and they sent a large fleet to America, although it sustained a lot of damage in a storm off Rhode Island. The Americans were hoping for a bigger commitment from the French, so John Adams went to France to help Benjamin Franklin continue negotiations. Oh good, you're finally here. Check this out. Hey ladies, I'd like to fly you like a kite, because you're electrifying. Isn't this great? Is this what you've been doing? Yeah, why? We were sent here on a diplomatic mission to secure military support from France, not to philander with the locals. Wait, no, ladies, come back. Worst wingman ever. But the Americans would get some more help. The Dutch provided aid, although they never formed an official alliance. More significant.
Right. And so I want to make sure we hit this point too, is that the British had the biggest naval force in the entire world. So to get help from the French, and the Americans really didn't have much of a naval, fleet. The French being able to help on that front would be really big, at least to counter some of the massive advantage that the British had.
Significantly, though, the Spanish, who had already been providing aid, officially joined the war in June 1779. They would provide support in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast, campaigns that heavily impacted the Native American tribes in those areas. Both sides actually enlisted the help of Native American tribes throughout the war, sometimes even pitting those tribes against each other. In the summer of 1779, after a series of raids against the Americans by the Iroquois, Washington organized an expedition that burned down more than 40 villages, forcing the tribes to relocate to Canada for British protection. And another group that shouldn't go unmentioned were African Americans, both free and enslaved. They joined both sides of the war, hoping to gain their freedom. But afterwards, many were simply returned to slavery, particularly those who had fought for the Americans. Despite owning slaves himself, Jefferson had written a condemnation of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but out of fear of offending the Southern colonies, this was removed from the final draft. For the same reason, the American Army stopped enlisting African American men in 1775, a policy that Washington, a slave owner himself, supported, but they were forced to reverse the policy after the British promised freedom to any slaves who joined them. In general, you stood a better chance of gaining freedom if you fought for the British. However, even those that left with the British after the war suffered mistreatment and discrimination in their new lives outside of America. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is...
Yeah, so I think it's very good. I'm glad because if you're a part of the indigenous population with the Native Americans or ostracized, extremely mistreated group with the African American, the black slaves. From that perspective, like you're trying to, you're also worried about your freedom. You're worried about what is this going to look like for you, and you want to be on a side that, well, one, looks like it's going to win, and two, is going to provide the best path for freedom for yourself, for your family, for those you care about and are part of your life. And so you can see why a lot of them would want to join the British if they're being treated better. It's a complicated issue when it comes to, like, with the US, because it was very much part of the culture, and I know some were pushing to not have that, but it was very much, even at this point, as part of slavery was a part of the Southern culture, and wanting to have everyone on board, it was really tough to not have that provided. And a lot of the founding fathers, like Jefferson, especially, had like 100 slaves. Not saying it's okay at all, but just saying that was a part of the culture at that point. And so you can see why they wouldn't have included that, but you can see why many African Americans would want to join with the British, because they were receiving better, or at least more promises in the beginning, but unfortunately did not get a lot of what they promised or what they had hoped for.
Is now in charge of Philadelphia, having a good time, partying down with, and even marrying a member of the Philadelphia elite. The same elite that had partied down with the British when they controlled the city. And suddenly, the people of Philadelphia, including the state governor, started accusing Arnold of having pro-British sentiments. To keep the people happy, Washington wrote a letter rebuking Arnold, calling his conduct imprudent and improper, and that was too many ouchies for Benedict Arnold to handle. He asked Washington to put him in charge of the fort at West Point. Then he contacted the British, offering to hand the plans of the fort over to them and join their side. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is our good friend no more. Luckily, the treasonous plan.
And you can see, like, you had stopped him. Like, he didn't get credit for Fort Ticonderoga. He didn't get credit for, the battle earlier, and now he's being blamed for having too much sentiment with the British and being part of the, an elite family, having too much sentiment. And then so he's, not only was he not getting credit for things he felt like he had done, which there's some arguments there, but he definitely deserves some credit. Now he's being publicly shamed by, the leader of the army, and that for him was the final straw. And that's where we are.
Plans were discovered on a captured British officer, but Arnold managed to escape before he was arrested. As a British brigadier general, he would go on to lead raids against American cities, most notably his raid of Richmond, Virginia in 1781. His betrayal shook George Washington, who had once again set up camp at Morristown. His leadership somehow held the Continental Army together through the harshest winter of the war. We're entering 1780, and Parliament was hopping mad that the war still wasn't over. The British debt was soaring, and despite taking parts of Massachusetts in late 1779, the North was in a stalemate, so the British decided to make a major shift in strategy to the South, an economically rich area with a higher level of support for the British, or so the British thought. A year earlier, they had captured the underdefended city of Savannah, Georgia easily, and a joint American-French counter-siege failed. Now, they laid siege to Charleston, South Carolina. It fell within months, with thousands of American troops surrendering to the British, a costly defeat. The British quickly moved to take control, and they sent stereotypical Hollywood villain with a British accent, Bannister the Butcher Tarleton, into the backcountry, where he hunted down rebels and destroyed them with ruthless brutality. The British presence also inspired local loyalist militias in the backcountry to rise up against their persecutors. The British really seemed to be onto something with their new strategy, and the ball was very much in Washington's court. I'm going to send my most loyal general, Nathaniel Greene, to the south to stop the British. Gonna have to overrule you there, George. We're sending hero of Saratoga and your biggest rival, Horatio Gates. Watch this, George. I'm going to save the day again. Everybody will love me, and I'm going to get your job. Here I go. And he got into one battle with Cornwallis, got annihilated, and ran away. Alrighty, let's go with your guy. Nathaniel Greene knew the British outnumbered his own forces and wouldn't be defeated with conventional tactics, so he had to think outside the box. He split his army into two, said, "Hey big boy, look at me," and then they went running in two different directions. Cornwallis sent Tarleton after Morgan, and he caught up with him at Cowpens, where Morgan proceeded to kick Tarleton's butt. Then the two led Cornwallis on a wild chase through North Carolina, his bigger and better equipped army much heavier and slower than Greene's quick and mobile troops. Greene led Cornwallis further and further from his supply line, then crossed the Dan River into Virginia, picked up some reinforcements, and turned back to face the now exhausted British. At the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, the two sides.
So you can see they split up the army, right? And so they kept dragging them farther and farther out, wearing them out. They have more equipment, more men, and they know the land. They know they're on their home field, and so they're able to spread them out, able to make them weaker, more tired. Then they get reinforcements. It's like they're drawing them back, and they're ready to then counterpunch, putting the British on their heels and really taking back the momentum.
Engaged in vicious close combat. Cornwallis, fearing loss, fired his big guns into the chaotic fighting, cutting down many of his own men. Greene retreated, giving Cornwallis the victory, but Cornwallis lost a quarter of his men in the fighting, so it felt much more like a British defeat. At this point, both sides desperately needed something to happen soon to end the fighting. The British were running out of money, while the Americans were again facing mutinies as the men went without pay or even basic living needs. Fortunately, the French were now showing up in greater numbers and were ready to fight. After his encounter with Greene, Cornwallis decided the only way to win the South was to first first prevent the Southern Continental Army from using Virginia as a supply base, so he abandoned the Carolinas, moving to Wilmington and on to Yorktown, a position the British believed would be easy to supply and support. On his march to Yorktown, he raided many farms, stealing horses and supplies from the locals, but also freeing thousands of slaves, many of whom joined him. The French saw Cornwallis's new position as an opportunity to land a decisive blow on the British. Washington wanted to attack Clinton in New York, but the French said it was a really dumb idea. And to be fair, it was. Instead, Washington sent out fake dispatches to make it look like they would attack Clinton, but secretly their combined force marched all the way down to Virginia. A large French fleet under the command of Comte de Grasse arrived and successfully cleared the British Navy out of the Chesapeake Bay. The combined land and naval forces then laid siege to Cornwallis's army.
So you can see it. Pause this. I want to show like how much, the distraction of New York, and so it would make sense from a British standpoint that with the Chesapeake that they could easily fund Virginia. There's more support for the British, more south. Virginia's a good resource base, and they could fill them out to either of the Carolinas. But with the French, as you can see, that they knocked out the British fleet that was there. They're now surrounded, and so really you can see how much that it's really put the British at a disadvantage now that they're
in Yorktown. The American and French forces tightened in around the city, raining artillery down on Cornwallis, who desperately appealed to Clinton for aid. But Clinton was unusually chilled out about the whole thing. Cornwallis held out for nearly a month before he had no choice but to surrender. Over 7,000 British troops were captured, a crushing defeat. And with that, Parliament had reached the end of its rope. The war just wasn't worth it, and it needed to end now. The British still held New York, Charleston, and Savannah, but fighting between the two sides mostly ceased as peace negotiations opened up in Paris. The resulting treaty in 1783 saw Great Britain remove its troops from American soil, recognize U.S. independence, and cede territory up to the Mississippi River. In return, the Americans agreed to pay any debt still owed to Britain and gave fair treatment to any colonists who had remained loyal to the crown. The Spanish got Florida, while the French got an economic crisis that led to its own revolution a decade later. Washington retired to his home in Mount Vernon, wishing his men farewell by saying, "I most devoutly wish that your latter days may be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable." He hoped to live out the rest of his days in peace. But unfortunately for him, a number of people wanted him to be the first leader of the new country. And by a number of people, I mean literally everyone. The first election campaign in American history was basically a grassroots effort to convince Washington to accept the office. He was sworn in on April 30th, 1789, and he himself established many of the standards and limitations of what the American leader should be. First of all, there was debate on what he should be called. Is he a king? Is he our glorious leader? In the end.
So yeah, it's important to know that Washington was wanting to retire and wanted to live the rest of his life, at Mount Vernon, but he was so popular, and so that there's so much support. He didn't campaign at all to be the leader, and people wanted him to be in charge. And so he then, eventually became sworn in as obviously the first president, and really is arguably the best president of all time because he set the precedent, right? We're going to talk about how he set a 2-term limit. He really set so many things in motion that preceding presidents would use as his example. Like the 2-term limit wasn't established until after FDR in the 1940s, because he had 4 terms. But he had set such a precedent and such a way of how we go about doing this in our new country, because it's not a king, it's not a dictator. It's we're creating a democracy in a new country, and as president. So it's so important of what he was doing. Again, he wasn't always the best, in game, in battle, general per se, but he was such a great motivator of people and just a leader of men that you can see why he made a great first president.
They went for a word that at the time was pretty modest. President, like the president of your local bowling club or office bake sale committee. He set up a cabinet of expert advisors, knowing that no president could know everything, no matter how much of a stable genius they claimed to be. He proposed major legislation to Congress and gave an annual State of the Union address to keep his own power in check. He stated that the U.S. should remain neutral in foreign conflicts, and in the end, he voluntarily gave up his power after just 2 terms. He could have made the presidency anything he wanted, but his careful and cautious actions helped set the precedent of an office that is powerful in its limitations, decisive through its diplomacy, and respected in its humility. And so the United States was born, and everything was perfect. It had no problems, not a single one. Certainly nothing that would, cause such an extreme divide that it would lead to a civil war. Anyway, moving on. Quick quiz. Name the most American thing you can think of. Baseball? Bald eagles? Calling the winner of an America-only
Well, there you have it. That is going to be the end of that. As always, Oversimplified does a great job of doing their videos, such insight with entertainment. I love it. They do such a good job. I wish you could come out with more often, but obviously there's so much work and so much animation and things that go into it. So like I said, if you have not already, please consider subscribing. That would help me out greatly. Like the video, share it as we try to build this up. Let me know if there's something else you want me to talk about specifically. Would love to do reactions with that. But thanks so much for watching. I will see you next time. Thanks.